A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. Jesus said to the crowds, "This is how it is with the kingdom of God. It is as if a man were to scatter seed on the land, and would sleep and rise night and day, and through it all the seed would sprout and grow. He knows not how. Of its own accord, the land yields fruit, first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. And when the grain is ripe, he wields the sickle at once, for the harvest has come." He said, "To what shall we compare the kingdom of God, or what parable can we use for it? It is like a mustard seed that, when it is sown in the ground, is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. But once it is sown, it springs up and becomes the largest of plants and puts forth large branches, so that the birds of the sky can dwell in its shade." With many such parables he spoke the word to them, as they were able to understand it. Without parables, he did not speak to them, but to his own disciples he explained everything in private. The Gospel of the Lord. A tree and shelter for all. In today's Gospel, Jesus presents to us two parables. The parable of the seed that a man sows and that grows without his knowing how, and the parable of the mustard seed, a tiny yet becoming a large tree. At the end of the first parable, Jesus narrates that when the crop is ready, the sower wields the sickle at once, for the harvest has come. The image of the sickle and the harvest would immediately remind Jesus' hearers of the sickle by which the Lord will gather the ripe harvest. In the book of the prophet Joel, this refers to God's judgment. On that day, the Lord is a refuge to his people, a stronghold to the men of Israel. The Lord is a refuge for his people. This image of sheltering is seen in the second parable. The tiny mustard seed becomes the largest of shrubs that birds find shelter under its branches. The parables transform from garden story to a vision of the end time. In the first reading, God plants a tiny cedar twig on a high mountain of Israel. That twig becomes a large and fruitful tree, under whose branches every kind of bird finds shelter. The birds symbolize the nations that flock to Israel's God on the glorious day of the Lord. This word picture in both the first reading and the Gospel envisions the day when God's sovereign and life-giving power will invade the whole world. The kingdom of God will grow to such an extent that all nations will take shelter beneath its shade. And how does the kingdom of God grow? It is not perceived in a striking, loud manner. Jesus uses the image of the quiet germination of a seed to teach about the silent growth of the kingdom. Of its own accord, the land yields fruit, first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. The growth of the kingdom is entirely God's initiative. We are asked to be patient. We wait patiently for the time of growth and of the harvest. The kingdom of God begins in a small, seemingly insignificant way, yet grows to great proportion. The mustard seed, according to the historian and naturalist Pliny the Elder, was the most invasive of all garden plants. It could get over walls, into neighboring field, and just about everywhere. Once it is sown, it is almost impossible to get the place free of it. It is hard to get rid of. The second parable illustrates how invasive and effective the kingdom of God is. Once it has taken its root, it cannot be removed. It grows of its own impetus in the world, and nobody can stop it. God is the God of here, there, and everywhere. The kingdom can find its way into the lives of individuals and communities in ways that may be surprising. It is the mustard seed that becomes the tree and shelter for all, for every man, woman, and child, no matter how humble and subtle it may begin.